Imagine this. You're not the hunter, you're the snack. 2 million years ago, the world was not designed for us. It was designed for things with sharper teeth, better night vision, and a talent for turning early humans into chew toys. Picture yourself dozing peacefully under a tree, only to be woken up by the polite crunch of a saber-toothed cat, deciding you look like a midnight burrito. Comforting, isn't it? Sweet dreams. Our ancestors lived through an age where survival was more about running really fast and screaming really loud than building civilizations. Forget skyscrapers, Wi-Fi, and oat milk lattes. Life back then was about not becoming dessert. Hyenas, the size of bears, crocodiles longer than a school bus, giant eagles swooping out of the sky like badly designed drones. All of them looked at humans and thought, delicious, but a little bony. And yet, somehow, those fragile little primates made it. You made it. You're lying in bed right now because your great-great-great-grand unimaginably great-grandparents spent thousands of years not getting completely eaten. Tonight, we're going to sink into their world. We'll wander the African savannas of 2 million years ago. We'll meet the monsters that stalked the night. We'll laugh because honestly, some of it is ridiculous. And we'll drift off to sleep, comforted by the fact that no one is trying to drag us out of bed by the ankle anymore. So, tuck yourself in, pull the blanket close, and let's step back into a time when humans were at the bottom of the menu. Close your eyes and let your imagination drift back. Not decades, not centuries, not even the cozy 0 years of farming and bread making that gave us modern life. No, we're going back 2 million years to a world that would feel like another planet. The air is sharp with the dry dust of the African savanna, a landscape where the trees stand far apart like shy strangers at a party, and the grass sways endlessly in the heat. This is not a world of cities or even villages. This is a world of silence, broken only by the rustle of wind through tall grass, the distant cough of a lion, or the shriek of some unlucky creature meeting its end. 2 million years ago, the Earth was caught in a cycle of constant climate shifts. The planet hadn't yet settled into the relatively stable weather we've grown spoiled by. Instead, temperatures swung like a pendulum. Rain came and went unpredictably. Forests shrank. Grasslands spread. Rivers dried up, then swelled again. Imagine trying to build a permanent life here. You couldn't. One season, the landscape might be lush and green, filled with fruit and game animals. The next season, it might be cracked earth, empty of water, leaving you with nothing but hunger and a gnawing sense that the universe is out to get you. And in many ways, it was. The world wasn't made for humans to thrive yet. We were fragile players on a stage dominated by beasts so terrifying that even a brief encounter could erase entire bloodlines. Early humans, if you want to call them that, were not the confident, tool-wielding, skyscraper-building beings you know today. They were closer to scrawny middle schoolers let loose in a weightlifting competition, underpowered, nervous, and very aware that one wrong move could end the story before it even began. These creatures, our ancestors, were hairier, shorter, and less brainy than us. Imagine a creature that sort of looked like a human, but also like your distant cousin, who's always been a little too excited about paleo diets. They walked upright, most of the time, but they weren't as graceful as we are now. Their lives weren't measured in years of mortgages and gym memberships. They were measured in days. Survived without being pounced on. And yet, despite this, they persisted, somehow, in a world where predators outnumbered prey, where every tree cast a shadow that could hide danger, where nighttime was basically an invitation for something with teeth to test its luck. They found ways to keep going. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the heartbeat of those long-forgotten humans, a steady drumbeat of survival echoing across millennia. The setting matters because it's more than just scenery. The climate, the rivers, the grasslands, the mountains, They all shaped what humans became. Without the constant threat of being eaten, we wouldn't have learned to run faster, climb better, cooperate, or even think ahead. Anxiety, that constant companion you may wrestle with before bed, was not a flaw in those days. It was a feature. To be jumpy, to flinch at every rustle, to panic at a shadow, those instincts were what allowed small bands of fragile primates to avoid becoming lion chow. The African savanna of 2 million years ago was a cruel teacher, but it was also the perfect classroom. Every sunrise was an exam, every sunset a reward. Humans learned to pass the test, not by strength, but by something subtler: endurance, adaptability, and sheer stubbornness. Where other animals adapted with teeth and claws, humans adapted with brains and cooperation. But back then, those qualities were still just seedlings. The mind was only beginning to bloom into the powerful survival tool it would become. So, picture it now: a group of scruffy, nervous hominins huddled together on the open plain. They've got nothing but each other, a few rocks, and maybe some sticks that look impressive but don't scare off anything bigger than a rabbit. Around them is a world buzzing with danger. To the west, the grass stirs with something unseen. To the east, vultures circle overhead, as if they already know how this story ends. It's not a question of whether they'll face danger, it's only a question of when. And yet, this was the stage upon which the human story unfolded. A world so harsh it should have destroyed us, but instead, it carved us into survivors. 2 million years ago, life was raw, brutal. But it was also the beginning of everything. Now that we've set the stage, let's meet the cast. At the heart of this drama were early humans. Though calling them human might be generous, they were hominins, members of the broader family tree that eventually led to us. Imagine a lineup at a very awkward family reunion where everyone looks just similar enough to be related, but different enough to make you stare. That's what it was like 2 million years ago. The star of the show was Homo erectus, a name that translates to upright man. Though if we're being honest, their posture wasn't as noble as the name suggests. They weren't striding confidently like modern humans. Think more of a teenager slouching through the hallways at school, trying not to make eye contact with anyone. But compared to earlier species, they were a huge leap forward. They stood taller, sometimes over 5 feet, which meant they could see above the grass and spot predators, or more likely, spot predators spotting them. They also had slightly larger brains than their predecessors, though not yet the kind of brains that could invent TikTok or air fryers. Their intelligence was just enough to notice patterns. Sharp rock cuts meat, fire makes things warm, or running faster than your slowest cousin means you live another day. These tiny leaps in awareness made all the difference. But Homo erectus didn't walk alone. They shared the landscape with relatives like Paranthropus boisei, a hominin that looked like a bodybuilder who only trained jaw muscles. These creatures had massive teeth and skulls built to crunch roots and tough plants. Imagine chewing on a raw carrot for hours and calling it dinner. That was their vibe. Strong, but not exactly versatile. They weren't competing with saber-toothed cats, but they weren't inventing tools either. There were also earlier forms of Homo, like Homo habilis, sometimes called the handyman, because they were among the first to use stone tools. Handy indeed, but still short, small-brained, and more likely to become a snack than a survivor if caught alone. Together, these species formed a ragtag cast of fragile primates, stumbling their way through a dangerous world. Now, let's pause here and give them some credit. You might be tempted to laugh at their awkwardness, to think of them as slow, clumsy, and doomed. But remember, without them, you wouldn't be here. They carried the flame forward, sometimes literally, once they figured out fire, often at great personal cost. Every awkward, hunched-over, rock-wielding ancestor of ours managed to survive just long enough to have children, who then did the same, passing the baton across countless generations until it reached you. Still, they weren't glamorous. If you met a Homo erectus today, you'd probably mistake them for a caveman from a comic strip. Shaggy hair, jutting brows, awkward gait. They wouldn't impress you with witty conversation. They might grunt, gesture, or offer you a rock like it's the latest iPhone. And yet, inside that brain was the seed of everything to come. Their world forced them to evolve in ways that set the stage for human success. Walking upright freed their hands for carrying tools, babies, and the occasional chunk of meat scavenged from a lion's leftovers. Bigger brains made it possible to solve problems, like how to crack open bones to get at the marrow inside a calorie-rich survival hack. Social living gave them a fighting chance against predators. One Homo erectus alone was dinner. 10 together, shouting, waving sticks, maybe throwing rocks that was enough to make even a hungry cat reconsider. What makes this so captivating is that it wasn't obvious they'd make it. At that point in history, humans were not destined for greatness. They were underdogs, plain and simple. For every tiny improvement they made, there were a dozen ways the world tried to erase them. Yet they endured, they stumbled, they adapted, they survived, and through their persistence, they opened the door to everything humans would later become. So, as you drift deeper into this story, remember, you are lying in bed tonight because of a long line of upright, awkward survivors who managed to keep going in a world that wanted them gone. You owe your cozy blanket to creatures who lived without any blankets at all. And the irony is that while they were just trying to survive the day, they were unknowingly writing the opening chapters of the human epic. Daily life 2 million years ago was not the kind of routine you'd put into a planner. There were no alarms set on your phone, no lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and croissants, no scrolling through endless feeds of cat videos. The closest thing to entertainment was staring at an actual cat, and not the small, purring kind, but the sort of cat that might decide your thigh looked like a convenient snack. Imagine living in a world where every day is a blend of chores, panic, and improvisation, all while trying not to be erased from the food chain. That was the reality for early humans. Picture a small group huddled together under the shade of a thorn tree. There's no house to keep them safe, no four walls, no roof, not even a door to slam shut when danger approaches. Their home is the open savanna, an endless sea of grass with scattered trees, where privacy is non-existent and predators have all the advantages. Nights are cold, days are scorching, and rain, when it does arrive, is less about refreshing showers and more about sudden floods that could sweep away the few precious belongings they've managed to cling to. Usually, just rocks, sticks, and maybe a scrap of food left behind by something bigger and scarier. Food was always at the center of daily life, but not in the gourmet sense. There were no recipes, no spices, no Instagram-worthy plating. Meals were opportunistic, desperate, and often unappetizing. Maybe it was a handful of berries plucked nervously while keeping an eye out for something lurking nearby. Maybe it was roots dug from dry earth with a sharp stick, chewed until jaws ached. And sometimes, just sometimes, if luck tilted their way, it was meat. Not from hunting like we imagine now, with bows and spears and heroic bravery, but from scavenging. A lion takes down a zebra, feasts until full, and wanders off to nap in the shade. Only then, when the coast seems clear, might a small band of humans shuffle forward, armed with rocks to smash bones and pry out marrow. That marrow, greasy and rich with fat, could be the difference between starving and staying alive another week. Of course, stepping in to grab leftovers was a gamble. Lions don't exactly post a "we're closed" sign after mealtime. They might still be lurking, ready to reclaim what's theirs. Hyenas might be circling, their laughter in the night a sound that makes even the bravest early human feel like a fool creeping into someone else's kitchen. Every calorie was won at great risk, and every mouthful was shadowed by the fear of sharp teeth appearing at any moment. Water was just as complicated. You couldn't simply turn a tap and fill a glass. Rivers and lakes were the obvious places to drink, but they came with their own hazards. Crocodiles lurked just beneath the surface, invisible until jaws snapped shut with bone-crushing force. Hippos wallowed nearby, looking deceptively harmless until they charged with the speed of a freight train. Even the act of quenching thirst became a mission requiring planning, watchfulness, and nerves of steel. You didn't linger at the riverbank. You approached cautiously, drank quickly, and left before something bigger noticed you. And then there was the problem of shelter, or the lack of it. Without houses, early humans relied on whatever nature provided. Trees gave some protection, but climbing into them at night wasn't exactly restful. Predators could climb too, and even if they didn't, the wind and cold would still gnaw at your bones. Caves were tempting, dark little havens that shielded from the elements, but they weren't empty. Bears, leopards, or hyenas might already claim them as prime real estate, and those landlords weren't interested in new tenants. Sleeping in the open meant constantly waking at every rustle, every sound carried on the wind, wondering if tonight was the night something decided you were easy prey. And still, somehow, in the middle of this relentless struggle, early humans found small victories. They learned to use fire, though at first, probably more by accident than design. A lightning strike sets a tree ablaze, and suddenly, there's warmth, light, and protection from some predators. Later, they learn to keep that fire going, carrying embers carefully wrapped in bark or leaves. Fire turned darkness into a manageable friend, though never fully safe. It was a fragile tool, always at risk of dying out, and relighting it wasn't as simple as striking a match. But when it worked, it transformed the night from pure terror into a slightly less terrifying backdrop. Every day was survival disguised as routine. Wake at dawn, shiver in the cold, forage for food, find water without becoming part of the water's food chain, avoid the gaze of predators, scavenge when possible, huddle together when nothing else worked. There was no margin for error. A sprained ankle could mean death, not because of the injury itself, but because limping made you the easiest target. A fever could be fatal without medicine or rest. Even a moment of inattention, drifting too far from the group, forgetting to check the wind could end in disaster. Yet in this constant struggle, the seeds of humanity's strengths were planted. Cooperation became essential. Alone, a human was hopeless. Together, a group could watch each other's backs, scare away smaller predators, and share what little food was found. Humor, that strange, human instinct, may even have begun here. Imagine the relief after a lion had finally wandered away, leaving scraps behind. Nervous laughter might bubble up, the kind that says, "We almost died, but we didn't," and somehow that feels hilarious. That laughter, fragile though it was, knit people closer, reminding them they weren't facing this brutal world alone. The creatures they feared most, however, deserve their own introduction, because to understand the daily struggles of early humans, you have to know the monsters that kept them awake at night. 2 million years ago, predators roamed in abundance, each one armed with sharper teeth, stronger muscles, and a more finely tuned instinct for killing than anything humans could hope to match. It was, in many ways, a parade of nightmares, each more terrifying than the last. Start with the saber-toothed cats. These were not your neighborhood tabbies. They were muscular beasts, with fangs so long they looked like they were designed by a horror novelist. Those teeth weren't just for show. They were weapons capable of slicing into the thick hides of mammoths and bison. Imagine being a small, scrawny human with nothing but a rock in your hand. staring up at an animal with blades growing out of its face. Every encounter was a coin toss, and the stakes were your life. Then there were the lions. Not the relatively manageable lions we know today, but larger, bulkier ancestors that viewed humans as convenient snacks. They hunted in groups, coordinated killers who could surround a small band of humans before anyone realized the danger. Their roars rolled across the savannah, a sound that must have frozen human hearts in terror, a reminder that no matter how clever you thought you were still firmly at the bottom of the menu. Leopards were stealthier, quieter, and perhaps even more unnerving. While lions announced their presence with thunder, leopards slipped silently through the grass, unseen until it was too late. They were masters of ambush, capable of dragging prey into trees. For early humans, that meant nowhere was safe. The ground was dangerous. The trees were dangerous. The very air seemed filled with unseen claws and fangs. And then came the hyenas. Forget the goofy laugh you know from cartoons. Prehistoric hyenas were enormous, with jaws capable of crushing bone as easily as you snap a twig. They weren't just scavengers either, they hunted, often in large groups. For humans, hearing that eerie laughter in the night wasn't amusing. It was a death sentence. You weren't laughing with the hyenas. The hyenas were laughing at you. This predator parade wasn't occasional. It was constant. Every shadow on the horizon, every rustle in the tall grass, every distant cry could spell doom. To live as an early human was to live in perpetual awareness that the world was filled with things faster, stronger, and deadlier than you. And yet, those fragile ancestors survived, not by being the fiercest, but by being the most adaptable. They learned to spot danger earlier, to use their voices to shout and scream in unison, to throw rocks and sticks in desperate attempts to create space. They were prey animals with the stubbornness of predators, slowly inching toward a future where the balance would shift. So, as you sink into sleep tonight, let the hum of this ancient world wash over you. Picture the long grass swaying, the stars glinting coldly above, and the endless sounds of predators moving just out of sight. Imagine the fear, but also the resilience. For 2 million years ago, every night survived was a victory, every dawn a triumph. And against all odds, those fragile humans made it through the parade of nightmares. That's why you can lie here now, safe, with nothing scarier outside your window than the neighbor's cat. The sky, at first glance, should have been the one refuge. When you think of danger, you imagine it stalking through the grass, crouching low, eyes gleaming, teeth bared. You imagine something chasing you across the savannah, not something swooping down from the heavens. But for early humans, the sky was not a peaceful backdrop of clouds and stars. It was a ceiling filled with sharp-taloned nightmares that saw them not as intelligent beings in the making, but as oversized snacks, convenient little bundles of meat. Imagine you are one of those early humans, your bare feet pressing against the hot dirt, your ears straining for sounds in the grass. You feel reasonably alert. You've scanned the bushes, you've checked behind you, you've sniffed the air in case a lion's musk lingers. You think you've done your due diligence. What you've forgotten, however, is to look up. That mistake could cost you dearly, because above you, with wings stretched wider than the length of a grown man, something is circling. Its eyes are sharper than any tool you've chipped from stone. Its patience greater than any hunter you'll ever become. This is the giant eagle. And giant was not an exaggeration. These birds could swoop down with terrifying precision, talons built to pierce through skin and muscle as easily as you tear into bread. Fossil records show that species like the Haast's eagle in later millennia hunted animals as large as deer, and in Africa, their predecessors were every bit as formidable. To them, a human child, or even a smaller adult, wasn't a challenge. It was an opportunity. One quick dive, a flap of wings, and you might find yourself lifted from the ground with nothing more than a shriek and a puff of dust left behind. If lions made humans afraid of the grass, eagles made them afraid of the sky. Even vultures, those ominous scavengers, added to the tension. They weren't swooping in to grab you alive, but their looming presence above could feel like mockery. Imagine walking under a hot sun, your stomach empty, your water skin non-existent, and overhead, a circle of vultures spirals lazily, as if they've already penciled in your death on their schedules. They weren't a direct threat most of the time, but psychologically, they were torment. They were the constant reminder that nature had already prepared for your failure, that your expiration was expected, and that when it came, there would be no funeral, just feathers and beaks descending to clean the bones. There is something especially chilling about aerial predators. On the ground, at least, you can run, you can hide, you can climb, you can throw a rock and hope for the best. Against the sky, you are naked. You have no cover but the branches above, no defense except huddling close together and waving your arms like lunatics, trying to convince a bird with claws the size of knives that you're bigger than you really are. Early humans probably spent nights clustered beneath trees, not just for warmth, but for protection against sudden aerial assaults. Even then, a determined bird could still strike. It must have been exhausting, realizing that survival wasn't just about what stalked behind you, but also about what cast shadows from above. And yet, here, too, the seeds of human adaptability were planted. Humans learned to move in groups because a giant bird was less likely to risk diving into a cluster of flailing bodies. They learned to use sticks not just for digging, but for waving overhead, creating the illusion of greater size. They learned to seek shelters where branches spread wide enough to block wings from maneuvering. In other words, they learned to factor the sky into their survival strategies. There's even humor, if you squint, in the idea of humans as Lunchables. Picture a giant eagle looking down, tilting its head, deciding whether this particular hominin is worth the effort. Bit stringy, but portable. Comes in a group pack. That was the reality. To the sky, humans weren't special. They were just another item on the menu. And perhaps that is the humbling truth of prehistory. Long before we flew through the air in airplanes, long before we claimed dominion of the skies, we were just passengers, hoping the talons of the true rulers missed their mark. If the sky was unnerving, water was downright treacherous. Rivers, lakes, and swamps might have seemed like natural havens, places where thirst could be quenched, where food like fish might be gathered. But lurking just beneath those calm, muddy surfaces were jaws older than human history itself. Crocodiles, ancient, patient, and more terrifying than any monster humans could have imagined. Picture again an early human approaching a riverbank. The heat of the day has baked their throat dry. Their lips crack, their tongue feels heavy, and the sight of water shimmering in the sun is irresistible. They crouch, hands scooping greedily, when suddenly the surface erupts. A shape, vast and scaled, launches upward. Jaws clamp shut with a force strong enough to crush bone, dragging the human downward into the murky depths. No warning, no chance, just silence, bubbles, and the rippling surface closing as though nothing happened. That was the risk every time you tried to drink. Crocodiles have always been ambush predators, masters of patience. They don't waste energy chasing. They wait. They become part of the landscape. To early humans who lacked the safety of buckets or wells, the rivers were lifelines and death traps all at once. Approaching the water was a gamble, a negotiation with ancient monsters who had survived unchanged for millions of years, precisely because their method was so effective. And for a fragile primate, there was no winning against those jaws once they closed. And then, as if crocodiles weren't enough, there were hippos. You might laugh at the idea of hippos as villains, But that's only because modern zoos show you their comical yawns and lazy splashes. In reality, hippos are some of the most aggressive animals on Earth. They are enormous, territorial, and surprisingly fast. To stumble too close to one's patch of river could mean being chased by a creature 3 tons heavy, charging faster than a human could sprint. Teeth the size of daggers made quick work of anything unlucky enough to be caught. For early humans, this meant that water was never safe. The very act of survival, drinking, bathing, catching fish, was layered with mortal risk. You couldn't relax at the water's edge. You couldn't linger. Every ripple, every splash had to be studied. Was it a harmless fish, or the first hint of a crocodile's approach? Was that log actually a log, or a hippo submerged just enough to lull you into carelessness? Survival meant treating water as both gift and curse, as necessity and nightmare. And yet, here too, humans adapted. They learned to approach in groups, to send scouts ahead, to study animal patterns. They might have chosen safer shallows, built makeshift barriers of branches, or timed their visits for when predators were less active. Necessity pushed them to innovation, even in the face of waterborne terror. And in time, their ingenuity would grow into wells, vessels, and eventually entire irrigation systems. But back then, all they had was caution, luck, and the stubbornness to keep risking the river even after one of their own disappeared beneath it. Humor creeps in when you imagine the absurdity of it all. Today, we worry about slipping on wet tiles in the bathroom. Back then, slipping too close to water might mean a crocodile invitation to dinner. Imagine trying to explain that to a modern human. Be careful when you drink. The water bites. It's absurd, and yet for millions of years, that was the unshakable truth. So when you sip from your glass at night, safe in your bed, remember the debt you owe to ancestors who crouched trembling at the water's edge, praying they wouldn't be the one dragged under. Water, the essence of life, was also the perfect disguise for death. Crocodiles and hippos kept humanity humble, reminding us daily that the universe wasn't designed for our comfort. We survived not because water was kind, but because we learned to respect its hidden monsters. Fear has a smell. You've probably heard that saying tossed around as a metaphor, but in the world of early humans it wasn't metaphorical at all. It was literal, pungent, and in many cases it was fatal. 2 million years ago, if you were scared, and you often were, your body betrayed you. Sweat, rapid breathing, the chemical changes in your skin, all of it announced to the world, here is a frightened little primate, ready to be eaten. And predators, equipped with noses infinitely sharper than ours, read those signals the way you might sniff popcorn from 3 rooms away. To them, humans were walking bags of anxiety, and the scent of that anxiety was irresistible. Imagine a small band of early humans huddled together at dusk. The air is cooling, the sky is streaked with red, and the noises of the night are beginning. The distant whoop of hyenas, the low rumble of a lion. Their hearts beat faster, their muscles twitch with readiness, but more importantly, their sweat glands are pumping. Each drop carries molecules, pheromones, stress signals that pour into the air. They don't know it, of course. They can't smell themselves. But the hyena on the ridge, the leopard in the grass, the lion crouched low, they can. To them, fear smells like opportunity. Predators are wired to notice the difference between calm prey and panicked prey. Calm animals move with purpose, grazing, resting, conserving energy. Frightened animals smell different, move differently, radiate energy in bursts that say, I will run, but not very far. Early humans were nervous creatures by default, which made them easy to locate. Like little popcorn machines sprinkled across the savannah, popping out scent signals that floated on the breeze. The wind itself became an enemy, carrying messages of terror from human bodies to waiting noses in the dark. And so humans learned to live with constant vigilance. They learned to study the wind, to stay downwind of known predator paths, to move cautiously when the air was still and hot, because stillness made their scent pool around them. They began to recognize that their own fear could kill them as much as any fang or claw. And yet fear was also their ally. It sharpened senses, widened eyes, raised hairs on their necks. Fear kept them alive by forcing their attention outward. Without fear, they would have been casual, careless, just another vanished species. With fear, they survived, one trembling day at a time. The irony is that while predators sniffed them out, humans were also beginning to develop a keen awareness of smell themselves. Their noses may not have been as powerful as a lion's or a hyena's, but they could detect danger in subtler ways. The faint, musky scent of a big cat clinging to grass, the acrid smell of blood in the air, the sour stench of decay that meant scavengers had already gathered. These were cues that meant change course immediately. A single whiff could send a band of humans skittering in a different direction like startled deer. And this is where humor creeps in. Imagine trying to settle down to sleep, your stomach growling, the grass prickling against your skin, and suddenly someone whispers, "Do you smell that?" The group sniffs. And yes, there it is, a hint of something feline, mixed with the unmistakable tang of their own collective terror. At that point, everyone has to decide. Pretend you don't smell it and hope the lion pretends to, or sit up all night sweating even harder, ensuring the lion now knows exactly where you are. It was a lose-lose scenario that somehow played out every night. Yet fear and scent worked in both directions. Humans may have been prey, but they weren't helpless. They began to understand that covering their scent mattered. Rolling in mud, traveling through smoke after a brush fire, or sticking close to stronger-smelling animals were primitive camouflage techniques. Even without knowing the science, they experimented with smell as survival. Later, of course, humans would develop fire, cooking, and even perfumes. But in these early days, masking fear was about crouching in the mud and hoping you smelled more like a wet log than like dinner. There is something beautifully human about this duality. Fear as weakness and fear as strength, scent as betrayal and scent as warning. The same bodies that betrayed them to predators also warned them of danger. Their anxious sweat may have given them away, but it also told them when they were pushing too close to the edge. Anxiety itself became a survival trait. And so, though they smelled like fear, they also survived because they were afraid. It's a paradox you can almost smell yourself, drifting across time, reminding you that fear is not a flaw, it's the reason you are here at all. If fear was one half of survival, tools were the other. And when I say tools, don't imagine gleaming bronze swords or elegant spears with stone tips. Imagine rocks, simple, jagged rocks. Imagine sticks, straight sticks, crooked sticks, heavy sticks, light sticks. The very first hardware store for humans wasn't a marketplace or a blacksmith's forge. It was the ground. Every tool was DIY, every invention a matter of picking something up, squinting at it, and thinking, maybe this will help me not die today. There's something strangely endearing about it. Early humans would have walked past a riverbed, seen a sharp-edged stone glinting in the sunlight, and thought, that could slice. Slice what? Well, anything. Plants, hides, maybe even fingers. But experimentation was the only way forward. And so, the world's first experiments were clumsy, dangerous, and sometimes hilarious. Imagine the trial and error of smashing two rocks together until one finally cracked into a shape with a sharp edge. Victory! Except now you've sliced your own hand and are bleeding onto the dirt. Lesson learned. Tools are useful, but handle with care. These crude stone flakes, known as Oldowan tools, were humanity's first step into technology. They weren't pretty, but they worked. A sharp rock could scrape meat off bone, split wood, or cut through plants that would otherwise be inedible. For a species trapped between predators and hunger, this was a revolution. Suddenly, bones left behind by lions weren't just garbage. They were treasure. Crack them open with a rock, scoop out the marrow, and you had calories rich enough to fuel a brain that was already beginning to grow larger than those of other primates. That growth, in turn, demanded even more calories, which demanded better tools. It was an endless cycle, a feedback loop of hunger-driving innovation. And then came the sticks. Sticks may sound laughable, but they were multi-purpose wonders. Digging sticks pried roots from the earth, spears extended, reach in hunting, and clubs well, they made a satisfying sound when swung. Paired with rocks, sticks became even more powerful. Bind a sharp flake to the end of a stick, and suddenly you have the world's first prototype spear. Not elegant, not precise, but enough to scare off a predator or jab at prey from just out of claw range. Tools gave humans something they had never had before. An edge, however small, against a world designed to eat them. They weren't the strongest, the fastest, or the fiercest. But with tools, they became unpredictable. A lion knew how to handle antelope. It did not know what to make of a scruffy primate waving a sharpened stick and throwing rocks. Predators were forced to pause, and in that pause, humans survived. The humor here lies in imagining early humans as reluctant inventors. None of them set out to revolutionize the species. They just wanted to stop starving. They didn't sit around sketching blueprints in the dirt. They just banged rocks together until something sharp appeared, and then said, "That's good enough." And yet, from that humble beginning, everything followed. Knives, wheels, satellites, smartphones. Every time you open a package with scissors, you are echoing the very first moment an ancestor picked up a stone flake and used it to cut. And beyond utility, tools changed psychology. Holding a rock with intent gave humans confidence. Waving a stick in the dark made them feel larger, more dangerous than they actually were. Tools weren't just extensions of the hand, they were extensions of the imagination. They said, "We can change the odds." And that simple shift in thinking separated humans from every other trembling creature on the savannah. From those rocks and sticks, a story began to unfold. A story of tinkering, experimenting, failing, and trying again. A story of survival, not through brute strength, but through invention. A story that still continues every time you buy a shiny new gadget, hoping it will somehow make life easier. It's all just an echo of that first ancestor who picked up a sharp rock and thought, "This might help." Teamwork was not just a nice idea 2 million years ago. It was the single, irreplaceable strategy standing between humans and extinction. Alone, an early human was about as threatening as a distracted meerkat. Small, underarmed, soft-skinned, and incapable of fending off most predators. But together, in a group, they gained something extraordinary. They gained numbers. They gained noise. They gained the illusion of strength. And sometimes, just often enough to make a difference, that illusion was enough to turn the tide. Imagine a lone human on the savannah at dusk. The grass is whispering in the wind, shadows stretch long, and there's a faint growl in the distance. That growl belongs to something large and hungry. If that human is alone, the story ends quickly, brutally, and with very little drama for the predator. Dinner is served. But now, imagine the same human standing with 9 others. They are all clutching sticks. They are all shouting, their voices overlapping into a strange chorus of noise. Rocks fly into the dark. Firelight flickers. The predator pauses. It hesitates. And that hesitation is everything. Teamwork created space where there would have been none. And in that space, humans survived another night. Group living was not optional. It was essential. Small bands of humans moved together, foraged together, and watched the horizon together. Every set of eyes mattered. Every set of ears mattered. If one person caught the faint rustle of movement, the whole group could respond. They became a web of vigilance, a living alarm system woven together by mutual dependence. In a sense, they were inventing society long before they could even speak in full sentences. The group was their safety, their shield, their only chance to carry fragile lives forward. But teamwork was not just about avoiding predators. It was also about sharing knowledge. One person who figured out which plants could be eaten without dying could pass that knowledge on, not just to their children, but to everyone in the group. One person who discovered how to smash a rock in a useful way could show others, multiplying the effect of that single moment of insight. A lone genius would have perished quickly. A genius in a group might save them all. And so humans began to evolve, not just physically, but socially. Cooperation became hardwired into their survival strategy. It's fascinating to think about how this shaped our psychology. Even now, thousands of generations later, loneliness gnaws at us in a way that goes beyond sadness. It feels unsafe, and that's because for most of human history, it was unsafe. To be alone was to be vulnerable, to be practically doomed. Your body knows this, even if your mind only interprets it as a vague unease. We crave company, because company once meant life. And of course, teamwork wasn't perfect. Sometimes it failed. Sometimes the predator didn't hesitate. Sometimes one unlucky individual still got dragged away while the rest shouted helplessly. But even then, the group had a chance. They could learn. They could adapt. They could decide not to camp in that spot again, or to keep bigger fires burning, or to develop better signals for danger. Each failure taught the group as a whole, turning tragedy into evolution. Teamwork also extended to raising children. Human infants were uniquely vulnerable, more helpless than almost any other creatures young. Alone, a mother couldn't both care for a baby and keep herself safe. But in a group, tasks could be shared. Others could carry the child, fetch food, watch for danger. This collective care, sometimes called allo-parenting, wasn't just about kindness. It was about efficiency. By pooling their efforts, humans managed to raise children in a world where almost everything was stacked against survival. Without teamwork, there would have been no next generation. And yet, teamwork came with its own set of tensions. Living close together meant conflict. Someone hogged more food than they should, or someone didn't pull their weight on watch duty. Disagreements flared. But even these conflicts became part of survival. Humans learned to negotiate, to resolve disputes, to keep groups intact, despite the inevitable friction. Because if the group split apart, if individuals walked away, those individuals rarely lasted long. The incentive to work it out was overwhelming. Thus, long before laws or governments, long before kings or parliaments, the glue of cooperation bound humans together in little clusters of survival. The truth is that humans did not dominate the planet by being ferocious, or strong, or fast. They dominated by being together. And that lesson, whispered by firelight, muttered in panicked shouts as predators circled, passed down in the DNA of survival itself, remains the core of who we are. We survive as groups, not as individuals. And that, more than anything else, is why we are still here. For all the seriousness of survival, there were also moments of sheer comedy. Imagine, if you will, a group of early humans crouched in the grass, trembling as a lion approaches. They have no real weapons, just a few sticks, and maybe some rocks that look impressive but don't really fly straight. Someone, perhaps the boldest, or perhaps the most foolish, decides to wave a stick in the air and shout. The lion, unfazed, stares with golden eyes. Another human joins in, waving their arms and hollering nonsense syllables. Suddenly, the whole group is on its feet, shrieking, jumping, trying to look terrifying. And for a moment, it works. The lion, startled by the sheer absurdity of these scrawny primates acting like mad creatures, backs away. Victory is theirs, though everyone knows, deep down, that it could just as easily have gone the other way. These moments of improvisation must have been both terrifying and hilarious. When you have no real plan, when you're essentially winging it against predators much stronger than you, absurdity is guaranteed. Picture trying to throw a rock at a leopard, missing completely, and then watching in horror as the rock bounces off a tree and smacks your companion instead. Or imagine a stick breaking in half the moment it swung, leaving the wielder holding nothing more than a twig, while facing a very unimpressed hyena. It's easy to laugh now, safe in our homes, but back then, laughter was probably part of the survival toolkit. After a close encounter, once the danger passed, the group might have laughed in relief. Humor can release tension, restore bonds, and remind everyone that even though the odds were ridiculous, they had made it through. Those early chuckles by the fire might have been the ancestors of every joke we tell today. There is also something funny in the sheer clumsiness of those first attempts at invention. Rocks that shattered the wrong way, sticks that refused to behave like spears, fires that sputtered out just when they were needed most. Every mistake was costly, but also instructional. Humans learned by trial and error was often the dominant theme. Survival was not elegant. It was a comedy of slips, fumbles, and frantic improvisations that somehow managed to add up to progress. Consider the likely scene of a group deciding to chase off a predator by throwing everything they could find. Stones, sticks, even clumps of dirt. The predator pauses, not because it is truly threatened, but because it is momentarily baffled. In that pause, the humans survive. But afterward, as the adrenaline fades, the absurdity of the performance sets in. They had no real chance, yet somehow it worked. That blend of desperation and ridiculousness may have been one of the earliest forms of human storytelling. Remember when Ulu tripped over his own feet while trying to scare the lion, and then the lion actually ran away? It becomes both a tale of danger and a moment of shared laughter. And perhaps that is the heart of the comedy of errors in prehistory. Humans were not prepared, not strong enough, not fast enough, and yet they muddled through. They made mistakes constantly. They looked silly trying to puff themselves up against beasts many times their size, but the sheer absurdity of their attempts carried with it a strange power. Predators could be confused, danger could be delayed, and in that delay, survival was possible. Even the act of making fire must have had its comedic moments. Imagine trying to spark flames with dry grass, only to watch the bundle burst into a blaze far too large, sending the group running in panic before sheepishly circling back once the fire settled. Or imagine sitting proudly by a fire only to realize you've set your own hair alight. Survival was messy, clumsy, and full of accidents. But those accidents taught lessons that carried forward. The comedy of errors was not just about laughter. It was about resilience. Every mistake, every botched attempt, every ridiculous scene of humans flapping their arms at predators was part of the process of learning. And laughter itself may have helped them endure. Because when you live in a world where danger is constant, finding humor in failure might be the only way to keep moving forward. So when you picture early humans trying to survive, don't imagine them as solemn statues of determination. Imagine them tripping over rocks, shouting nonsense at lions, and laughing in relief when, against all odds, it actually worked. They were clumsy, fragile, and often ridiculous, but they were also stubborn enough to keep trying, again and again, until one day, their mistakes added up to triumph. When the sun began to sink below the horizon, early humans must have felt the air tighten with dread. Daylight, even with all its dangers, was at least a time when predators could be seen, shadows could be judged, and some kind of planning was possible. But when the light bled away and the sky turned into an ocean of stars, the rules of the game changed entirely. Night belonged to others, and humans knew it. The first moments of dusk may have carried a strange beauty, the streaks of red and gold, the flickering silhouettes of birds heading home. But for our ancestors, it was the opening act of panic. Imagine being part of a small group, huddled together, as the last embers of sunlight fade. You feel the temperature dropping, the warm air giving way to a chill that seeps into your bones. You hear the landscape change, diurnal birds falling silent, insects beginning their chorus, and in the distance, the low, throaty rumble of a predator announcing its presence. Your skin prickles, because you know what comes next. The glowing eyes, eye shine, the eerie gleam caused by a reflective layer in animal retinas, is something most modern people experience only when their car headlights catch a deer at night or when their cat stares at them in the dark hallway. But for early humans, this sight wasn't a quirky surprise. It was a nightly terror. Imagine looking out into the tall grass beyond the fire and seeing pairs of floating lights, yellow or green or even red, depending on the species, moving silently, patiently, waiting. Those eyes weren't decoration. They were signals of hunger, locked onto you and your group, shining like lanterns in the dark. Nightfall panic was not irrational. Humans lacked night vision. Their eyes, while excellent at picking out details in daylight, failed them in the dark. They could hear the crack of a twig, the swish of grass, but they couldn't always tell where the danger was coming from. Predators, on the other hand, were built for this hour. Lions, leopards, hyenas, all of them prowled confidently beneath the moon, their senses sharpened by evolution to thrive where humans faltered. To step beyond the fire's circle was to step into the realm of the unseen. Fire itself was a fragile comfort. If they managed to keep one burning, it provided a bubble of light, a small circle of safety. But fire was temperamental. Wind could scatter it, rain could extinguish it, and fuel was always limited. One careless moment, and the fire might falter, plunging the group into true darkness. And in that darkness, glowing eyes crept closer. You could almost imagine the predators whispering to each other. Not yet. Wait until the light goes out. The panic wasn't just about being eaten. It was about helplessness. At night, the very landscape felt hostile. Every rustle seemed louder, every cry more urgent. The imagination filled the shadows with monsters. And often enough, the imagination was right. Panic tightened the chest, kept the heart racing, left the body in a state of perpetual readiness that made true rest nearly impossible. Even when nothing attacked, the expectation of attack gnawed at the mind. And yet, humans adapted. They learned to cluster more tightly at night, bodies pressed together, not just for warmth, but for reassurance. They developed night watches, someone always half awake, straining their ears for danger. They built fires larger, carried embers carefully, and eventually began to choose sleeping spots with natural defenses, rock outcrops, caves, or trees where glowing eyes could at least be kept at a distance. But the panic never vanished. It shaped them, carving caution into their instincts, instilling a fear of the dark so deep that even now, with electric lights and sturdy doors, many of us still feel uneasy when the room is too quiet, too empty, too black. There's humor in it too, if you imagine the absurdity. Picture one poor soul jolting awake at every cricket chirp, insisting he saw eyes in the bushes, while the others groaned and rolled over. Or someone trying to keep the fire alive but fumbling the wood, sending sparks into a companion's hair, or the group collectively jumping at the sound of a nearby owl, only to sigh in relief when they realized it wasn't a leopard. Nightfall panic may have been terror, but it was also a nightly comedy of nerves, a mix of shrieks, sighs, and the occasional embarrassed laugh when a monster turned out to be nothing more than a shadow. But for all the humor, the lesson is serious. Night shaped human evolution. It taught us fear, vigilance, and the importance of light. It drilled into our bodies the reflex to stay close to others when the world turns dark. Every time you flick on a bedside lamp or pull the covers tighter after hearing a creak in the hallway, you are reenacting that ancient panic, that old nightly ritual of survival under the glowing eyes of predators. If panic defined the onset of night, exhaustion defined the rest of it. Sleep, that fragile necessity, was a luxury our ancestors rarely enjoyed in full. Forget the notion of 8 uninterrupted hours under a cozy blanket. For early humans, sleep came in fragments, stolen in short bursts, and often broken by sudden alarms. Sleep, interrupted, was the only kind of sleep they knew. Imagine lying down on the hard ground, your body aching from a day of foraging, your stomach not quite full. The fire flickers beside you, casting shifting shadows across the faces of your companions. You close your eyes, willing yourself into dreams, but within minutes, your rest is broken by the unmistakable laughter of hyenas echoing across the night. You sit up, heart hammering. Others stir too. You listen, every muscle tensed. Sometimes the laughter fades, and you drift back to restless sleep. Other times, the laughter grows closer. The firelight catches the gleam of eyes, and suddenly, everyone is awake, shouting, throwing sticks, driving the intruders away. When the danger passes, you collapse again, but your body never fully lets go. Sleep was always conditional, never guaranteed. A lion's roar could shake a group awake. The cry of a child pierced the night, demanding soothing. An owl's sudden swoop sent half the camp scrambling. Every hour carried interruptions, and each interruption carried the reminder that death might be only steps away. The result was a kind of chronic fatigue, a life lived half asleep, the brain constantly toggling between rest and alertness. Modern scientists believe this fragmented sleep may have even shaped our patterns today. Humans are lighter sleepers than many animals, prone to waking easily at noises, quick to startle. This sensitivity was adaptive. It kept us alive. A deep sleeper in prehistory might never wake again. Shallow, broken sleep meant more eyes and ears ready to respond, more chances that someone would notice the predator creeping closer. Sleep, interrupted, was a survival strategy, even if it left everyone groggy in the morning. But think of the humor in it too. One person nods off, only to snore so loudly that everyone else wakes, hissing at them to be quiet before they bring a leopard down on the camp. Someone dreams so vividly that they wake screaming, causing a chain reaction of panic through the entire group. Or a fire collapses, sending a log rolling onto someone's leg, turning sleep into a chaotic scramble of shouts and curses. Night after night, the attempts to rest must have been riddled with moments both terrifying and absurd. Stories retold in whispers the next day as everyone tried to laugh away the exhaustion. Interrupted sleep also bound humans closer together. Sharing night watches meant trusting one another. A group that couldn't cooperate would fall apart, and falling apart meant vulnerability. To sleep, even lightly, was to place your life in the hands of others. That trust, earned and reinforced nightly, became the glue of human communities. You didn't just share food or tools. You shared responsibility for each other's dreams. The impossibility of deep rest may also explain why fire became so cherished. Not only did it keep predators hesitant, it gave psychological comfort. The crackle of flames became a lullaby of sorts, a promise that someone, something, was holding back the dark. But even then, the fire wasn't foolproof. A rainstorm might douse it, leaving the group trembling in wet darkness. A strong wind might scatter sparks, forcing everyone to stomp around in chaos, stamping out tiny fires instead of sleeping. Fire helped, but it didn't solve the central problem. Sleep was never safe. It is tempting to pity them. These weary ancestors who lived in a world that would not allow rest. But perhaps there is another way to see it. Their interrupted sleep kept them alive long enough to pass their genes forward. Their constant fatigue forged a resilience we still carry. And in some strange way, their struggle echoes in us today. When you wake at 3 a.m. for no reason, when your mind jolts awake after a noise outside, when you feel restless in the small hours, you are reliving that ancient rhythm. You are the descendant of people who survived by never sleeping too deeply. So, the next time your slumber is disturbed, take comfort in the lineage behind that interruption. You are carrying on a tradition of vigilance that stretches back millions of years. Sleep interrupted is not a failure. It is the proof that your ancestors stayed alive, night after night, in a world where every sound in the dark could mean glowing eyes and sudden death. The sound of hyenas laughing in the night is eerie even now, when we can hear it safely from the comfort of a television documentary or behind the sturdy walls of a safari lodge. But for early humans, that chilling cackle wasn't just background noise. It was a promise that the scavengers and hunters of the savannah knew where you were, knew you were weak, and were waiting for you to make a mistake. Hyenas weren't just animals lurking out in the dark. They were the villains of every bedtime story, the monsters under the bed made flesh. Children probably went to sleep with the sound of those voices in their ears, parents whispering warnings not to stray too far, not to wander away from the group, not to leave the fire untended. The hyena problem wasn't a nuisance, it was a daily and nightly terror. Hyenas have always been misunderstood. Today, people imagine them as cowardly scavengers who only eat leftovers from nobler predators like lions. But the fossil record and observation of modern spotted hyenas tell a different tale. These were not timid bone pickers. They were ruthless hunters in their own right, capable of chasing prey across long distances, equipped with jaws strong enough to crunch through bone as though it were stale bread. For early humans, who had little in the way of defense, hyenas weren't a laughing matter. They were a serious, existential threat. Picture yourself sitting near the embers of a fire, darkness pressing in all around. You've finally begun to drift into that shallow sleep. Humans specialized in half-aware, listening for danger, even as your body aches for rest. And then it comes, faint at first, like a giggle in the far distance, but it grows louder. More voices join in. It isn't a giggle anymore. It's a chorus, a twisted song carried on the wind, rising and falling, mocking and promising. Hyenas have scented the camp, caught the fear in the air, and they're circling. The problem with hyenas was numbers. A lion was terrifying, but one lion could sometimes be scared off with shouting and sticks. A leopard might strike, but it usually worked alone. Hyenas, however, came in clans. Dozens of them, sometimes more, coordinated in a way that mirrored human cooperation, but turned against us. They worked as a team, herding prey into ambushes, wearing down defenses with persistence, and they were clever, too clever for comfort. Early humans probably recognized a dreadful similarity between themselves and these predators. Both species relied on social groups, on communication, on strategy. Facing hyenas must have felt like staring into a distorted mirror, a reflection of what humans could be if they had stronger jaws and fewer scruples. What made hyenas even worse was their persistence. They didn't give up easily. If a group of humans chased them off, they would often slink away, just far enough to watch, to wait. Their patience was legendary. They knew humans had to sleep eventually, had to let their guard down, had to move away from the protection of fire to fetch water or gather food. The moment someone strayed, the hyenas would test the boundaries again. They were relentless villains, the kind that never died at the end of the story, but always came back for the sequel. And then there was the sound. That laugh. It wasn't funny to humans. Not then. Not ever. It was mocking, otherworldly, a sound that cut into the spine, and reminded everyone listening that they were not alone, not safe. Parents probably told children bedtime tales that began not with "once upon a time," but with "don't you hear them laughing?" Hyenas were the bogeymen, the shadows lurking just beyond the firelight. But fear of hyenas did something remarkable. It pushed humans to adapt. It forced them to strengthen their group bonds, to keep fires burning longer, to invent better weapons. It taught them caution and vigilance. Hyenas were villains, yes, but they were also teachers, shaping human behavior by their constant menace. Even the sound of their laughter kept people awake and watchful, reinforcing the survival habits that would eventually make humans stronger. And in a strange way, there's humor in this too. Imagine the absurdity of a group of humans trying to chase away a clan of hyenas, waving sticks and shouting, while the hyenas sit just out of reach, jaws working, laughter rising, as if they were in on some private joke. The joke, of course, was that the humans were only temporarily safe. The villains would return tomorrow night, and the night after that, and again, until eventually the humans found a way to tip the balance. Hyenas were the monsters of the night, but they were also the goads that pushed humanity forward, step by trembling step. If hyenas were the villains, fire was the first hero of the human story. The discovery of fire was not a single moment, not one dramatic spark that changed everything in an instant. It was a slow, fumbling dance with nature's most powerful force. At first, fire was terrifying. A lightning strike set a tree ablaze, and humans watched from a distance as the flames roared and consumed. The heat, the smoke, the danger, all of it was overwhelming. But then, curiosity crept in. The fire died down, leaving behind glowing embers and charred wood. Someone, braver or hungrier than the rest, crept closer, felt the warmth, and realized this destructive force could also be a source of comfort. The first sparks of fire humans used were not their own creations. They were stolen from lightning-scorched trees, from smoldering brush after a wildfire, from volcanic activity when the earth itself split open and spilled flame. Early humans would have gathered around these flames cautiously, perhaps terrified they might be attacked by the fire itself. But over time, they learned. They learned that fire kept the cold at bay. They learned that it kept predators hesitant. They learned that food placed in the flames came out different, softer, tastier, easier to chew. And, though they didn't know the science, safer. Fire was magic. And it was hope, but fire was also fragile. Keeping it alive required constant attention. Sparks had to be coaxed, embers shielded from wind, wood gathered endlessly. If the fire died, there was no easy way to make a new one. Matches, lighters, flint and steel, none of these existed yet. The group had to carry fire with them, sometimes wrapping glowing embers in bark or dried grass, moving them carefully across the landscape like sacred treasures. If the fire went out, they might have to wait weeks or months for another lightning strike to gift them a new one. Every flame was precious, every ember a lifeline. And yet, fire came with its own problems. It didn't just keep predators away, it attracted them too. Imagine sitting by a small blaze, feeling the warmth against your skin, finally daring to relax, and then noticing a pair of glowing eyes just beyond the circle of light. Lions, curious and calculating, were drawn to the strange flicker. They may have kept their distance, unsure of this new phenomenon, but they didn't vanish entirely. Fire was not a fortress. It was a fragile shield. And predators were always testing its edges. There's a certain comedy in the thought of those first experiments. Picture an early human dropping meat into the flames, only to watch in horror as it bursts into a blackened lump of ash, or someone leaning too close and singeing their hair, filling the camp with the smell of burnt fur and embarrassment. Fire was hope, yes, but it was also trial and error, full of mistakes and small disasters. And yet, even those mistakes were part of progress. Each accident taught a lesson, each charred failure a step toward mastery. Over time, fire became more than survival. It became a gathering place. Humans no longer sat scattered in the dark, each trembling alone. They came together around the flames, shared warmth, shared stories, shared laughter. Fire extended the day, allowed conversations and planning after the sun had gone down. It became the first stage for human culture, the glowing heart of every camp. And with it came a sense of hope. For the first time, humans could push back against the night. Of course, fire didn't make them invincible. It didn't stop the hyenas from laughing nearby, or the lions from prowling, or the leopards from stalking, but it gave humans a chance, and sometimes a chance was all they needed. That flicker of light in the dark said, "We are not helpless anymore." It was tiny, fragile, easily extinguished, but it was hope, and hope, once kindled, has a way of growing, and not once, two are. Even today, we feel the comfort of fire, the glow of candles, the crackle of a campfire, the hum of a fireplace. It soothes us in ways deeper than we understand. It's a memory written in our blood, carried from those first sparks 2 million years ago. Fire is warmth, safety, and community. It is the ancient promise that even in a world filled with predators, humans can carve out a circle of light. Food is supposed to be comforting. Today, we wrap it in pretty packaging, photograph it for social media, and argue about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. But for our ancestors 2 million years ago, food was rarely comforting, never pretty, and absolutely never photographed. Meals were desperate affairs, hurried, awkward, and almost always disappointing. They ate because their bodies demanded it, not because the flavors delighted them. And yet, without these rough, uninspired meals, we wouldn't be here at all. Well, the diet of desperation began with plants. Early humans scavenged constantly for anything that might fill the aching void in their stomachs. Roots, tubers, seeds, berries if it grew, they tried it. Unfortunately, many of those experiments ended badly. Plants can be deceptive. A berry might look juicy and inviting, but contain toxins strong enough to make a whole group sick. A root might be nutritious if cooked, but raw, it could tie stomachs in painful knots. Trial and error became the only cookbook, and error often wrote the bolder chapters. Imagine someone confidently biting into a plant, only to spend the rest of the day doubled over, while everyone else quietly made a note never to touch that one again. The hard-earned knowledge of what not to eat may have been as important as discovering what was safe. When luck favored them, fruits and nuts were small miracles. A patch of wild figs or an acacia tree, heavy with pods, could sustain a group for days. But fruit seasons came and went, and nuts required patience to crack open with stones. Most of the time, the meals were far less glamorous. Grass seeds could be gathered in handfuls, but they offered meager calories compared to the effort required. Leaves were abundant, but human stomachs were never meant to chew through cellulose like those of antelope or elephants. Chewing leaves for hours left jaws sore and bellies still hungry. Protein was more complicated. Hunting large animals was mostly a fantasy at this stage. Humans had neither the tools nor the speed for it. Instead, they scavenged, waiting until predators had eaten their fill, and then creeping forward to pick at what was left. This meant gnawing scraps of meat clinging to bone, tearing at sinew with crude stone flakes, and cracking open marrow cavities for the precious fat inside. The image of humans as mighty hunters is a later invention. At this time, they were more like janitors of the savannah, grateful for whatever leftovers they could snatch, before hyenas returned to claim the scraps. And when no big carcasses appeared, they turned to smaller creatures. Insects were abundant, reliable, and surprisingly nutritious. Termites, crickets, beetle larvae all became staples. The sound of crunching bugs might disgust modern ears. But for early humans, it was the taste of survival. Packed with protein and fat, insects were portable snacks that required no tools to harvest, just nimble fingers and a willingness to crunch. You could almost imagine one ancestor reassuring another. Don't think about what it looks like. Just chew. Small animals, too, found their way into the menu. Lizards, birds, rodents, anything that could be caught became food. These meals were not easy to acquire, and they came with risks. A rodent bite could become infected. A bird could escape with a burst of wings, leaving the hunter embarrassed. Lizards could slip away faster than expected. Yet when successful, the reward was vital calories. Roasted on a fire, if one was available. Swallowed raw, if not. Desperation rarely left room for fussiness. Water plants, too, filled in the gaps. Reeds and aquatic tubers could be dug from muddy banks, though collecting them often meant braving crocodile-infested waters. Hunger makes strange bargains. Risk your life to a reptile for a mouthful of starch. Somehow, again and again, those bargains were made. Of course, desperation also led to bizarre culinary attempts. Bones weren't just cracked for marrow. Sometimes they were chewed outright, teeth grinding against calcium, in the hope of extracting anything useful. Ashes from burned wood might have been licked for their salty taste. Even dirt itself may have been consumed in small amounts to settle stomachs or absorb toxins, a practice that continues in some cultures today. It's almost comedic when you picture it. A group of early humans crouched in the dirt, each holding something utterly unappetizing, chewing solemnly because survival demanded it. No seasoning, no utensils, just grit, determination, and the constant hope that whatever they were chewing wouldn't kill them. If modern humans had to eat this way, grocery store shelves would look a lot less colorful. The diet of desperation would never sell as a fad book. Nobody would market the raw root and beetle plan with smiling faces on the cover. But without it, the human story would have ended long before recipes were even imagined. And yet, out of this desperate menu, something remarkable happened. Brains grew, bodies adapted. The calories from marrow and fat, the proteins from insects and small animals, the starches from roots, all fed an organ that was quietly expanding, laying the groundwork for language, tools, and imagination. The diet may have been miserable, but it was fuel, and that fuel built the foundations of humanity. Sometimes, survival doesn't look gourmet. Sometimes, it looks like chewing beetles in the dark and trying not to gag. But survival it was, and survival was enough. History often celebrates heroes as bold, deliberate figures, warriors, inventors, explorers, but in the long sweep of human prehistory, many of our true heroes were accidents, small quirks of biology, random genetic changes, odd little advantages that nobody asked for, but that made the difference between life and extinction. These accidental heroes were not individuals waving flags of triumph. They were mutations, adaptations, and strange twists of fate that quietly tipped the balance in humanity's favor. Consider skin. Early humans living in Africa were exposed to relentless sunday. Too much exposure risked burns, disease, and weakness. Over countless generations, darker skin with higher melanin content became the norm, providing natural protection against ultraviolet rays. No one chose it. No one planned it. But those with the traits survived better, lived longer, and had healthier children. A genetic quirk became a shield, and without it, our ancestors might have withered under the unforgiving sky. Or think about the larynx, the voice box. Subtle changes in anatomy allowed humans to produce a wider range of sounds than other primates. At first, these noises were probably just grunts and calls, but over time, they became the raw material for language. A slightly different arrangement of muscles and cartilage, a tweak of evolution, gave humans the ability to coordinate more effectively, to plan, to teach. What began as accidental anatomy eventually shaped culture, storytelling, and everything we know as communication. Then there were the immune systems, constantly tested by parasites, infections, and diseases. Some individuals carried genes that made them slightly more resistant to certain illnesses. Those genes, once rare, became widespread as their carriers lived longer and reproduced. To them, there was no sense of being heroic. They were just a little less sickly, a little luckier. But in the grand story, those tiny resistances became life-saving advantages for entire populations. Even lactose tolerance, that strange ability to digest milk as adults, began as an accident. For most of human history, milk was useful only for infants. Adults lacked the enzyme to break it down, but somewhere along the way, a mutation allowed some adults to keep producing that enzyme, letting them drink animal milk without discomfort. In later millennia, when herding and domestication became possible, that accidental mutation provided calories and nutrients in times of famine. A small twist of DNA reshaped human diets forever. These accidents weren't just physical. Behavior had quirks too. Some individuals were more curious, more willing to poke at things, to experiment. Curiosity can be dangerous. It might get you bitten by a snake or poisoned by a plant. But curiosity also discovered edible roots, figured out how to use rocks, learned which animals could be tracked. Groups with a few curious members gained an edge, and slowly that trait persisted. Curiosity itself was an accidental hero, one that carried us forward. And then there was fear. Fear seems like a weakness, but as a survival mechanism, it was priceless. Those who startled easily, who worried more, who stayed alert, often lived longer than the reckless ones who wandered too far or ignored the signs of danger. The genetic and behavioral quirks that made some individuals more anxious may have irritated their companions, but those nervous souls kept the group alive. They became, unwittingly, heroes through their constant vigilance. Accidents even shaped our hands. A slight change in the thumb's position made it opposable enough to grip tools with precision. No one designed this. No committee of ancestors voted on better thumbs. It simply happened, and once it did, it spread, because the ability to hold a rock securely was the difference between scavenging effectively and going hungry. That small anatomical accident paved the way for everything, from spears to smartphones. The humor of it all lies in perspective. Imagine trying to explain to an early human that the reason they survived was because one of their ancestors happened to be slightly more sun-resistant, or slightly more lactose-tolerant, or slightly more anxious. They wouldn't see themselves as chosen or heroic. They would probably just grunt and keep chewing on roots. But the truth is that survival often hinged not on grand choices, but on quiet accidents. And in the end, those accidents accumulated into destiny. Darker skin, better thumbs, a tweak in the voice box, a nervous temperament, a curious streak. All of these quirks converged to create the foundation of humanity. They were small victories, barely noticed at the time, but together they were everything. The accidental heroes of prehistory never asked for applause. But without them, the story of humans would have ended before it began. If you strip away the terror and the teeth, some of the predators our ancestors faced were frankly ridiculous. It might seem strange to laugh at animals that could turn an early human into a mid-evening snack, but sometimes the only way to stay sane in a world where everything wants to eat you is to notice the absurdity of it all. Welcome to the Prehistoric Predator Comedy Club, where the acts weren't comedians with microphones, but oversized cats and awkward scavengers who didn't know they'd become the stuff of bedtime horror stories millions of years later. Take the saber-toothed cat, for instance. At first glance, it seems like the ultimate nightmare. A hulking feline with canines so long they could pierce the throat of a mammoth. But those teeth, as terrifying as they looked, were also hilariously impractical. They were so big that the poor creature couldn't just bite into things the way normal cats do. It had to be delicate, careful, like someone trying to eat spaghetti with a pair of swords strapped to their face. One wrong move and snap, those teeth could break. Imagine being a human, hiding behind a bush, watching this majestic monster carefully maneuver its giant dental cutlery just to take a bite. You'd still be scared out of your mind, but some part of you might giggle at the absurdity. That thing could kill me in an instant, but also, I think it just drooled all over itself. Or consider the giant hyenas of the Pleistocene. Hyenas are already unsettling enough with their bone-crushing jaws and unsettling laughter, but the prehistoric versions were massive, some the size of small bears. Yet despite all that strength, their trademark behavior was still scavenging and squabbling over scraps. Picture a giant hyena lumbering onto the scene, all brawn and menace, only to trip over its own feet in the chaos of a feeding frenzy. Early humans probably watched from a safe distance, clutching their sticks, whispering to each other, "Let's wait. They'll fight each other soon, and then we can sneak in." And sure enough, hyenas would turn their fearsome strength against one another, bickering over bones like toddlers fighting over the last toy in the sandbox. Comedy gold, if you weren't the one being chased. Even lions, those symbols of majesty, weren't immune to slapstick. Hunting in groups made them dangerous, but it also made them prone to collective failure. A misjudged ambush, a mistimed pounce, and suddenly an entire pride was left swatting at empty air, while their intended prey sprinted off. Imagine early humans huddled on a hillside, watching this display. The lions regroup, licking their paws, pretending they'd meant to miss. The humans laugh nervously, partly from relief, partly because watching the mighty trip over themselves is universal entertainment. It's the kind of moment that might have sparked the first whispered jokes. Humor as a shield against fear. And then there were birds. Giant eagles swooping down to snatch children might have been terrifying, but it was also an awkward business. Carrying off something nearly your own weight with talons was no small feat. Sometimes the eagle probably underestimated, grabbing hold of a struggling human only to wobble clumsily in midair, flapping furiously before dropping its prize. For the unlucky human, for the rest of the group watching, once they'd made sure the victim survived, the retelling would probably lean into the absurd. Did you see the look on his face when the bird dropped him? Like a sack of potatoes. It was tragedy turned comedy, the way humans have always coped. Predators were frightening, yes, but they were also living creatures prone to mistakes, accidents, and sheer silliness. Leopards dragged kills into trees, only to drop them by accident. Crocodiles lurked in rivers, but sometimes they lunged too early and ended up floundering in the mud. Even the mighty mammoths, though not predators, were intimidating giants that could topple trees with their tusks, but also got stuck in bogs, trumpeting indignantly as smaller creatures circled to mock them. Humans, watching all this, learned not only fear, but amusement. The world was deadly serious, but it was also slapstick. And that duality, terror and humor intertwined, helped shape a uniquely human way of seeing the world. When you laugh at something scary, you take a little of its power away. Even if the joke is whispered with shaking hands, it is still resistance. It is still survival. Fear is often painted as weakness. We grow up being told not to be afraid, to conquer our fears, to stand tall against the things that frighten us. But for our ancestors, fear wasn't weakness at all. It was a sharpened tool, as vital as a stone flake or a sturdy stick. Fear kept them alive when their bodies offered little protection. Fear was the invisible fence that kept them from stepping too far into danger. It was, in many ways, the first survival technology humans ever possessed. Imagine standing at the edge of a dark forest 2 million years ago. The shadows are thick, the air is still, and you feel the hairs on your arms rise. That tingling, that clenching of your stomach, that inexplicable certainty that something is wrong, that is fear. And more often than not, it was right. Perhaps there was a leopard crouched in the branches, waiting. Perhaps a snake coiled in the grass, invisible until too late. Fear screamed its warnings in ways that logic could not. It froze muscles, widened eyes, sharpened hearing. It turned an ordinary human into a hyper-alert creature capable of noticing the tiniest shift in the world around them. Fear also shaped group behavior. A sudden sound in the night sent a ripple through the camp, one person's panic spreading instantly to everyone else. Today, we call it contagion. But back then, it was crucial. If one person sensed danger, the whole group reacted. Better to have 10 people panic unnecessarily than for one to die because no one else believed them. Fear made humans overreact, yes, but in the brutal calculus of survival, overreaction was safer than calmness. Calmness got you killed. Even jumpiness had evolutionary roots. That startle reflex, the way your body jolts when a twig snaps behind you, wasn't some annoying quirk. It was a finely tuned alarm system honed over millennia. Early humans who startled quickly were more likely to notice predators in time. Those who were slow to react were, well, they weren't around to pass their genes on. That is why, even now, you might jump when a friend sneaks up behind you, or flinch when you hear an unexpected noise at night. Your body is still living in the savannah, even if your mind thinks you're in a safe apartment. Fear also carved caution into daily habits. Humans learned to scan the horizon constantly, to avoid certain places, to move in groups. Fear taught them which berries to avoid, which animals to never approach, which caves were better left unexplored. Generations of whispered warnings: don't go there, don't touch that, don't walk alone, built a culture of survival founded on fear. Without it, curiosity would have led too many into danger, and humanity might have ended in a single reckless leap. And yet, fear wasn't paralyzing. It was balanced with courage, because too much fear would mean never leaving the safety of a tree, never venturing into the open to find food. The trick, learned slowly over thousands of years, was to listen to fear without letting it trap you. Fear was a guide, a teacher, not an enemy. It taught humans to respect the world's dangers while still daring to step into them. There's humor in this too. Imagine a group trying to settle down for the night. One person leaping at every sound, another rolling their eyes, another insisting they definitely saw glowing eyes in the bushes. The cycle repeats, nerves fray, and eventually, everyone laughs at the absurdity of being so scared and so sleepless. Fear made them jumpy, but it also bonded them, turned panic into shared experience, transformed terror into stories told around the fire, and we still carry that legacy. The reason horror movies work is because our brains are still wired for savannah nights, still attuned to shadows and noises and imagined predators. The reason you get goosebumps when walking down a dark hallway isn't because the hallway is dangerous. It's because for millions of years, dark spaces were dangerous. Fear lives in us because it once saved us. Far from being weakness, fear was the greatest survival tool humans had. Before spears, before fire, before language. It honed our senses, shaped our communities, and kept us alive long enough to invent better defenses. Even now, when we jump at shadows or feel uneasy in the dark, we are honoring that ancient inheritance. We are still the children of fear, and because of it, we are still here. The story of humanity begins with trembling in the shadows, with hearts pounding as glowing eyes circled, with sticks clutched in sweaty palms that offered almost no protection. For a long time, humans were prey. That was the unshakable reality of the savannah 2 million years ago. To be small, slow, clawless, and edible was to live at the mercy of teeth and talons. But somewhere along the way, something remarkable happened. The hunted began to learn the rules of hunting. The meat on the menu began to pick up the menu and change it. The long, slow transition from prey to predator was not neat or swift. It was hesitant, awkward, full of failures, but it was relentless. And eventually, it turned the world upside down. At first, survival was about scavenging. Humans were too fragile to take down large animals, so they waited for lions or leopards to finish, and then crept in for the scraps. It was humiliating, but it worked. Over time, though, scavenging sparked ambition. Watching predators hunt must have been like free lessons in strategy. Humans noticed that lions worked in groups, that leopards struck from ambush, that hyenas chased prey into exhaustion. They observed, imitated, experimented. A group of humans with sharp rocks and long sticks might not be able to take down a zebra outright, but they could throw stones, wave fire, and push the animal into panic, making it easier to finish the job. Suddenly, dinner wasn't only a matter of luck, it was something they could tilt in their favor. The real secret weapon wasn't claws or speed, it was persistence. Humans discovered the one thing they had that most predators lacked: endurance. With their ability to sweat and cool themselves, they could keep moving long after faster animals had to stop. The so-called persistence hunt may have been one of humanity's earliest true hunting strategies. A group of humans could chase an antelope for hours, not in a sprint, but at a steady jog. The antelope, terrified and overexerted, would eventually collapse from heat and exhaustion. It must have seemed like magic, to fell an animal not by strength or speed, but by stubbornness. That moment, the prey dropping because the hunters refused to quit, was the beginning of humans turning the tables. But even then, it wasn't easy. Imagine the comedy of it. A band of early humans running after an antelope, huffing and puffing, tripping over roots, shouting encouragement at each other, only for the animal to vanish into the brush at the last second. They must have looked ridiculous, but slowly, those ridiculous attempts became reliable strategies. And in that shift, humans began to see themselves differently. They were not just prey dodging fangs. They were hunters with their own power. Tools amplified this transformation. A sharp rock tied to a stick became a spear, extending reach, allowing humans to strike from a safer distance. Fire, once only for warmth and fear, became a weapon too. Flames drove animals into traps or away from hiding spots. By combining persistence, tools, and teamwork, humans grew bolder. They no longer waited for lions to finish. They began to take food for themselves, sometimes even stealing kills directly from other predators. The scavenger became the competitor. This change reshaped the savannah. Predators, who once saw humans as easy meals, began to hesitate. A lion thinking of charging a lone antelope now had to consider, what if those noisy bipeds showed up again, throwing rocks and waving firebrands? Hyenas, once relentless, found themselves harassed by stick-wielding bands who refused to run away. Humans didn't suddenly become invincible, but they became unpredictable. And unpredictability is terrifying to predators. The transformation also reshaped humans themselves. Hunting demanded communication, planning, coordination. It forced groups to strategize, where to hide, how to chase, when to strike. It demanded imagination, picturing the prey's path, anticipating its moves. Slowly, brains grew to match the ambition of the hunt. Muscles adapted, bones changed, and confidence blossomed. Fear never vanished. It remained the constant drumbeat of survival. But alongside fear, something new grew. Pride. The thrill of the hunt, the satisfaction of meat earned rather than stolen. The shared celebration around the fire when the group succeeded. And so, over thousands of years, humans shifted roles in the ecosystem. They remained prey. Lions and leopards never stopped trying, but they became predators too, a strange hybrid, living in both worlds. It was this duality that made them powerful. They understood what it was to be hunted, and they learned how to hunt. They knew fear intimately, and they used it to instill fear in others. In time, they would rise to the top of the food chain, not through brute force, but through the slow accumulation of lessons, the careful crafting of tools, and the sheer refusal to stay powerless. The story of humanity is, at its core, the story of prey. As the story of survival quiets and the night around you grows still, it is worth pausing to think about what it all meant. Our ancestors, those fragile beings stumbling through the savannah, had no idea they were shaping the future. They weren't dreaming of civilizations, of skyscrapers, of smartphones buzzing at 3 a.m. They were just trying to make it to the next sunrise. They crouched in the grass, listened to the laughter of hyenas, clutched at fire like a holy relic, and whispered to their children not to wander too far. And because they endured, because they didn't give up, you are here now, lying in a soft bed, in a safe room, with nothing more dangerous than the glow of a screen interrupting your night. Good night, ancestors. Thank you for every terrified sprint, every desperate meal, every bruise from falling while running from predators. Thank you for your awkward rock flakes, your clumsy fire starting, your persistence hunts that probably left you sore for weeks. Thank you for huddling together in the dark, trusting each other enough to sleep in shifts, sharing warmth, sharing fear, sharing scraps of marrow when food was scarce. Thank you for being anxious and jumpy, for teaching us to flinch at noises, for making fear a survival tool. Without your vigilance, your panic, your constant unease, our lineage would have ended in the jaws of a lion. It is almost impossible to imagine how exhausting it must have been. To never truly rest, to never eat until full, to never walk without scanning every shadow. And yet, despite it all, they kept going. Every dawn was a victory. Every child who lived to adulthood was a miracle. Every fire that survived the night was hope carried forward. They didn't know we would one day look back at them with gratitude. But we do, and we should. Tonight, as you settle deeper into the quiet of your room, remember how lucky you are. Your predators are digital now. Glowing rectangles that buzz and beep and interrupt your dreams. You don't wake to glowing eyes in the grass. You wake to a phone demanding your attention. The dangers have changed, but the gratitude remains. You are the product of countless generations who endured the unendurable. Their struggles are written in your bones. Their fears echo in your instincts. Their victories flow in your blood. So breathe deeply. Feel the softness of your bed, the warmth of your blanket, the safety of your home. You are not crouched on cold ground. You are not listening for hyenas. You are not waiting for a fire to sputter out. You are safe. You can rest. You can honor your ancestors, not by trembling through the night, but by finally closing your eyes and letting sleep take you without fear. Good night, ancestors. Good night, lions and leopards. Good night, hyenas, you strange, laughing villains. Good night, flickering fires and broken tools. Good night to every trembling child who grew into an ancestor, who survived long enough to carry us here. The story they began is still unfolding. But for now, your story can pause. The predators are gone, the night is safe, and the only interruption you need to fear is the buzz of your phone in the morning. Sleep, then, with gratitude. Sleep with peace. Sleep knowing that the struggle is over, at least for tonight. And that's where we'll leave our ancestors for tonight, safe by their fire. And you safe in your bed. Sleep well, dream deeply, and let the worries of the day fade away. If you're still awake, don't worry. You can keep drifting with one of the 2 videos on your screen right now. Just click and let the story continue to carry you closer to rest. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you'll always have a place to return when you need a soothing voice to guide you to sleep. Good night.